Now, my name's Kenny Willis. I was born here in southern Humboldt in 1955, which was the year of the big flood. We lived in Sylvandales. There was a community in Sylvandales then, and the whole town just got wiped off the map. And we lived in Mom and Pop Bird's store up in Phillipsville, in the back of the store for the rest of that year. My mom said that she put me in a banana box. She would work the counter and I'd be there in a banana box. And then we moved to Whitethorn in '62. Dad had come out here in the '40s to cut timber, this old growth timber. He was raised in North Carolina on a tobacco farm with 12 kids, and he could see that that farm was just not gonna support him. And so he headed across the country looking for the highest paying job that a person that couldn't read could get, and this fallen timber was it. They were making the kind of money that doctors make in those days. And you know, he'd make $100 a day, and a new truck could cost you $2,000. You know, in 20 days he could buy a brand new truck. And so he cut timber for Sid Green out in Whitethorn until 1968, and we grew up on what they called Thomas Mill Flat out, that's a couple of miles past Whitethorn. The mill was gone, but all the houses were still there around the flat. And we were the small family. We had 7 kids. The Says had, the Bruces next door had 8 kids, the Says had 11, the Plunketts had 12, and all of us kids used to just play. There was a hill there that we called the Grass Hill. And man, we came down that hill on everything. In the summertime, we used to slide down it on cardboard, and in the wintertime, we had this great big Pepsi Cola. Maybe it was a Coca-Cola cap that was a sign, advertisement. We'd jump in that sign and slide down the hill. My brothers put me and my little brother Vernon in a loader tire one time and rolled us off of there. And rolled all the way down, across the flat, across the road. Vernon jumped out right off. And I once it started rolling, I couldn't get out. Rolled all the way down and into the Mattole River. And we were always doing crazy stuff like that. There was right down in Whitethorn, there was an old mill yard there that still had a big cable that ran down across the mill pond. And the mill was closed, but all the stuff was still there. And we had what we called the question mark. It had a little loop on the top and a big loop on the bottom, and you hook that little loop on that cable and then set in the big loop and slide down across that mill pond. We had a big swing up there behind Thomas Mill Flat that swung out over a huge draw. You'd be 100 feet in the air by the time you got out there. And my brother Bruce built a tree house. That tree house was basically famous. It was 75 feet up in a redwood tree. There was seems like it was a Seventh-day Adventist church that had been abandoned basically. And you know, we tore that church down and built that tree house. It had a 2-inch rope, and the first time you came up there, he had a rule that you had to climb up the rope. Later, you know, he drove nails in the tree, and then when it got up to the fork, he had steps in it. But the first time you went up there, you had to go up that rope. And man, I'm telling you, I was probably, you know, 50, 60 pounds. You know, 4 feet tall, maybe 4.5. That just seemed like forever getting up that thing. And I mean, it seemed like I was clear up in the clouds by the time I got there. And then in '64, there was another tremendous flood. I think it might even actually been worse than the '55 flood. We lived out there. My sister's house got washed. It came up so fast they didn't even get their car out. They got out of there on foot, and it washed their house and their car right away. And everything down on the river, it just washed it away. a big log came floating down the Eel River and hit the Redway, lower Redway bridge and knocked it out. And we were trapped out there in Whitethorn for 2-3 weeks probably. The National Guard would fly a helicopter in with Army surplus food. And I remember Ono Russo, that owned the Whitethorn store, he would come around with his generator and run it for a couple hours to charge up your refrigerator. And yeah, every couple of days he'd come around and charge up everybody's refrigerator. And man, all of us kids, we just did whatever we wanted. I mean, we ran around out there catching salmon and steelhead and shooting deer. And we would go out through the monastery and clear up over into Whale Gulch, just hiking around for the day. 25 of us, you know. Sometimes it'd be 4 or 5, but there was a family that ran the Needle Rock Ranch, and they were friends. My oldest brother his girlfriend was the oldest sister down there, and we used to walk out there. It was probably 10 miles from Whitethorn down to Needle Rock. We'd walk down in there and stay for a couple of days, and then walk back out. They'd walk out with us and stay at our house for a couple of days. And we had I guess it's what they would call a hobby ranch now, but it wasn't really so much of a hobby for us. We had about an acre garden, and we had a milk cow and chickens and rabbits, and we would raise a steer, or we would buy a steer and raise a hog and split them with the neighbor next door. So they'd raise the hog one year and we'd buy the steer. We'd raise a hog next year and they'd buy the steer. And we used to scald that hog in a 55-gallon barrel of water. We'd build a big fire around it and then get it boiling and drop the hog down in there and then scrape all the hair off of it. And I caught my pants on fire one year standing too close to that fire. Man, I took off running. I don't know where I was going, but the neighbor kid tackled me and threw me down and rolled me over until he got it out. It probably saved my life. I had 3rd-degree burns on my shin from what had burnt so far. And I remember that's the first time I ever came out of Whitethorn to go to the doctor. Another time I got bit by a rat out there. We were pulling up this lumber and a rat, mouse, it wasn't a big rat, came running out and I grabbed it and it bit me. And a couple of days later I started getting sick, feverish and stuff, and so my mom brought me into the hospital. And I mean, the thing is that you didn't go to the hospital unless you were dying. You know, you had to seriously have something wrong with you before, because nobody had insurance. But anyway, they thought I had rabies. And so I got those rabies shots, 7 shots every day. They give me one in each side of my stomach. And I'd come home, my brother would say, yeah, you know, you're gonna be foaming at the mouth. We'll have to tie you to the post out in the front and just stay away from you. It turned out that I had rheumatic fever. But anyway, we moved into town in 1968. We moved into Garberville, and you know, I was still pretty much the same kid. I had friends, all kinds of friends. We just ran around. You know, before I got my driver's license, we'd walk from Redway to Garberville. I had friends down in Piercy. We'd hitchhike down there and visit them. I've always just considered myself the luckiest guy in the history of humankind to have grown up in southern Humboldt in that era, to have been born in 1955 and grown up in the era of muscle cars and rock and roll music. And the war in Vietnam really changed this country, and it really changed the culture around here. You know, when the boys started coming home, we were smoking pot, and most people had long hair, and you know, the locals were slow to accept that change. You know, they'd beat up the hippies, and you know, there was conflict. There was a lot of conflict, but in time, that back to the land movement that started in the 60s, it had pretty much established itself by the 70s. People would come up here and buy a piece of property and, you know, put a tent on it and start building a house. And those hippie houses, I've worked on several of them, that they just started out as one room. And then, or maybe they start out as a trailer with an addition on it, and then a front room, and pretty soon it's a big house, you know, and I've come in there to work on them, and some of the studs are 16 inches apart, some of them are 2 feet apart, some of them don't even reach up to the top plate. There have been a couple of them that I worked on that I said, you know, the best thing to do here is just burn it down and start over. But people were living in the hills around here. And I started falling timber when I was 17, and I stayed in the woods until I was 42. And I lived in the woods. I would go up with my little travel trailer in April and stay up Indian Creek or out at Xenia or Ketten Palm, somewhere, until November. I'd come back down and stay in town for the winter. And it was just a great time. You know, people were happy, but I did, like so many people, develop a drug habit, and it robbed me of a lot of my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but you know, it was robbing me. And I used to grow some pot every year up on the strip, or you know, if I was working from home out in my backyard or something, I grow a little bit of weed, and I realized that there isn't enough money in the world to support a drug habit. And my daughter was born in 1980, and I just realized that she deserved a better dad than this. And I got busted selling weed up in Oregon in 1981 and went to, I was sentenced to 7 years. And there had been a riot in the prison. A few people got killed, and the American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit against Oregon Department of Corrections, and they won. And they had to reduce the population by 500 effective immediately. So I've been in there for 18 months. I'd just been before the parole board. They said I could come back in 44 months for a parole, and then a couple months later they came in and said, roll them up. Kenny, you're going home. I was the warden's gardener by then, and they were looking for nonviolent crimes that are least likely to reoffend, and I rose right to the top.